Imagine a 15-year-old kid being set up to be humiliated in a luxury ballroom, then, in 90 seconds, turning the room silent with a flawless waltz. That's Aiden Morales of Newark. The clip goes viral, and Evelyn Hart, a powerful CEO haunted by her daughter's death, steps in to help. On paper, philanthropy. In truth, a dangerous pact of image, guilt, and power. Then the scandal hits. A leaked will names Aiden as a beneficiary. A community greenhouse is smashed in the night. A ruthless rival moves in. Aiden refuses to be anyone's mascot and calls the city to action. Real scholarships, rolling libraries, school gardens, receipts in the open. What begins as a rescue becomes a public reckoning and the seed of a new family. Stay to the end to witness the moment a surname is planted and takes root. The tension in the gilded ballroom of the pier was suffocating, not because of the grandeur or the pressure of wealth, but because Aiden could feel every eye fixated on him. He stood near the orchestra pit, fists clenched by his sides, heart pounding against the inside of his ribs like a trapped bird. Someone had clearly orchestrated this. The sheet music was changed last minute. The host had offered a cruel smile, and whispers traveled like fire across velvet-draped tables. A waltz, of all dances, the one he feared most. He hadn't trained for this. He hadn't rehearsed it. He'd told them that. Panic clawed at his throat as a few guests chuckled. "Looks like the genius doesn't know a three-step," someone muttered. The conductor gave the nod. The strings lifted. Aiden froze. Before he could retreat, a hand closed gently but firmly around his. Ethan, calm, immaculately dressed, and infuriatingly unshaken, Ethan leaned in and whispered close to Aiden's ear, "Follow me. Don't think, just move." His tone was soft, but beneath it pulsed a command. Aiden wanted to protest, to bolt, to disappear, but his knees buckled for another reason altogether when Ethan guided him forward. The marble floor beneath them was flawless, slick, but Ethan's grip grounded him. The music swelled. The tempo began. Ethan took the first step. Aiden followed. 1, 2, 3. The room disappeared. Aiden didn't breathe so much as mimic. Ethan led, not just in steps, but in presence, subtly correcting Aiden's stance, angling his hand, nudging him into posture. The rhythm crept into Aiden's body like muscle memory he didn't know he had. At first it felt like drowning, then it felt like flying. Their movement cut through the tension like a hot knife through satin. Guests who had sneered now leaned forward, confused. Aiden's cheeks burned, but not from shame. With each turn, Ethan whispered the next sequence, guiding, never mocking. "Good. Again. Lift your chin there." At that cue, Aiden did. Ed raised his head not defiantly, but with purpose. His eyes met the lens of the event photographer just as they spun near the column. The shutter clicked. And that would have been nothing if not for the live stream. 20,000 people watched in silence as the boy no one expected anything of executed a clean, elegant turn. When the music came to a delicate close, Aiden bowed instinctively, and applause erupted. Not pitying applause, but sharp, genuine claps. The kind that cuts deep into silence. On the periphery, half hidden behind a half glass of untouched champagne, Evelyn Hart watched with an unreadable expression. She had known Elise for over a decade. Elise had fought so hard to give this boy everything, and Evelyn had been too proud, too scarred, too obsessed with being right. She had walked away from Elise's funeral with a composed face and a hollow core. But this boy Aiden moved with a hesitation that mirrored Elise's early days. She could see it, the slight delay before each step, the microsecond of calculation. But more than that, she saw the defiance Elise once had. That stubborn dignity. And in the way Aiden followed, yet quietly imposed his own tempo. She saw what was lost the night Elise's car swerved off that wet road. Guilt pressed behind Evelyn's sternum like a vice. By the time the press releases were drafted that evening, promising prodigy charms at the pier, Evelyn had already made her decision. Publicly, it would be described as philanthropy. Another act of generational investment in youth talent, the kind that made headlines and soothed legacy. But in the dark corner of her mind, Evelyn knew this wasn't about charity, it was about debt. It was about the nights she had ignored Elise's calls. About the last message she never returned. Aiden would not be abandoned, not like Elise had been. The machinery of power spun fast. Contracts reviewed, guardianship papers prepped, discreet phone calls made. Her people moved quickly. The boy had become more than a cause. He was now a wager against her own self-hatred. Later that night, as guests filtered out of the pier, their laughter fading into the Manhattan hush, Aiden stood outside the ballroom again. clutching the same pair of gloves he'd forgotten to wear. Ethan had vanished into a car hours ago with a casual "you'll thank me someday" over his shoulder. But the moment still lingered like static in his body. Trembling, breath fogging the early fall air, Aiden stared back into the space where it had all happened. He hadn't tripped. He hadn't failed. And he had danced. The camera had caught it. The lift of his chin. The silent answer to ridicule. Somewhere, someone was already turning him into a headline, but more than that, someone had seen him. Really seen him. And when Evelyn Hart stepped quietly beside him, her presence heavy with intent, Aiden didn't flinch. He only turned, eyes narrowing as if expecting a transaction. She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Let's go home." The legal guardianship arrived not with ceremony but with protocol and entourage. A manila envelope, a driver in a dark suit, and a clipboard holding a single signature page. Aiden opened the door expecting a conversation and was instead met with a pen. "Miss Hart would prefer to keep this as seamless as possible," the assistant explained without making eye contact. The apartment's air was still thick from his grandfather's cooking, and the intrusion of wealth felt like spilled ink on a page that hadn't asked for it. Aiden didn't sign. Not yet. He excused himself wordlessly, disappearing into the cramped kitchen, where a receipt from the bodega sat next to the sugar jar. Grabbing a pen from the drawer, he flipped the paper over and scribbled in sharp, uneven letters. 1. Ironbound Community Center. Keep volunteering. 2. Saturdays equals garden. 3. Grandpa Samuel. Monthly visits. He folded it once, then again, and returned to the doorway where the assistant stood. Without ceremony, Aiden held out the crumpled terms. "She wants me? Fine. These are mine." The man hesitated, then took the note with the kind of reluctant respect reserved for those who don't quite know the rules but make their own anyway. It didn't take long for the message to reach Evelyn. Less than 20 minutes later, her lawyer called back. "Miss Hart has reviewed the boys." "Amendments," he said carefully, as though the word boy might shatter if said too harshly. "She accepts. No renegotiation, no clarification. Just a nod in absentia." That silence, more than anything, unsettled Aiden. He had expected a counteroffer, perhaps even a smug dismissal. Instead, he found himself packing a duffel bag before sunset. Samuel lingered in the background, his eyes betraying worry he refused to voice. "You still owe me chess every other Sunday," the old man said, voice thick, not quite hiding emotion. Aiden gave a half nod and avoided his gaze. He didn't hug him. They didn't do that. But as Aiden stepped into the black sedan, he glanced back through the window once, long enough to see Samuel wipe his glasses with the sleeve of his shirt, though the lenses had no smudge. That was their goodbye. Quiet, awkward, permanent in its own language. The ride uptown was long, not because of traffic, because of everything unspoken. The driver, a tight-lipped man with a headset, didn't speak unless absolutely necessary. Aiden didn't ask questions. He sat in the back seat like a question mark, surrounded by silence that felt more like surveillance. He clutched his duffel bag on his lap, his knuckles white from how hard he was gripping the strap. Occasionally, he'd look out the window, not at the skyline, but at the smaller details. A mother pulling her child's hood up. A teen tagging a mailbox. A street vendor arguing over hot dogs. Things he understood, things that didn't ask him to perform. With each mile, the neighborhoods changed like chapters he didn't belong in. Brownstones replaced bodegas. Flower shops replaced pawn shops. When they crossed into the Upper East Side, he felt it in his teeth, that hum of wealth, the kind that makes itself known by what it doesn't say. He hated it already. Aiden tried not to look impressed as they pulled up to the building. He failed, just a little. It wasn't the building itself, it was the idea of it. The doorman who opened the car door as if Aiden had always belonged. The brass finishes that didn't shine, they whispered. The elevator with no buttons because someone else decided where you were going. Inside the penthouse, Evelyn wasn't waiting with open arms. She was at a side table reading something on a tablet, a glass of untouched wine beside her. "Welcome," she said, her tone clipped, not cold but calculated. Aiden stood stiffly by the entrance, unsure if he was supposed to walk in or be summoned. She set the tablet down and gestured to the seat across from her. He didn't sit. Instead, he held out the wrinkled bodega receipt like a treaty. "If you try to back out of that," he said, voice steady, "I walk." "Doesn't matter where." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, eyes on him. "We had a deal," she said simply. "I don't break deals, Aiden." There was no affection in it, but there was respect. Aiden nodded once and finally took the seat. For the next half hour, they didn't talk much. Evelyn asked 2 questions: what time he usually woke up and if he had any food allergies. That was it. No small talk. No questions about his past or Elise or what he liked to do for fun. Just logistics. Aiden answered like he was filing tax forms. She noted everything on a device with a stylus, occasionally pausing to ask if he needed anything from the pharmacy or if he preferred a desk or table for homework. But there was no warmth in her efficiency. It was like she was solving for a variable. Still, when he mentioned that he would need access to the community garden on Saturdays, she typed that too without blinking. "You'll have a driver," she said, "and a contact person." That should have annoyed him. It didn't. Not because he liked being handled, but because she was treating his demands as legitimate. She wasn't indulging him. She was honoring the paper. That mattered. More than either of them admitted aloud. The ride to her apartment had started as just another errand to Evelyn. But when they reached a red light near 86th Street, something shifted. Aiden, still sitting stiffly, noticed the photo taped to the dashboard. A little girl, around 7 maybe, with flyaway curls and a gap-toothed smile. The name Elise written in childish cursive on a blue ribbon pinned beneath. He didn't ask, Evelyn didn't offer. But something in the silence changed shape, became heavier. Not oppressive, just ... full. A corridor with too many closed doors. The kind of silence where history isn't avoided, it's survived. Neither spoke the rest of the way. But when the driver parked and Aiden reached for the handle, Evelyn finally spoke, low, barely audible. That was her favorite color. Aiden didn't ask whose. He didn't need to. They stepped out into the polished marble of the building's entrance. No words left. Only terms. Only memory. Only the weight of a name that still lived on a ribbon. Everything in the duplex felt like it belonged to someone else's logic. The refrigerator doors closed with a soft seal that reminded Aiden of hospital equipment. The lights dimmed without switches, like they were anticipating mood. Even the chairs seemed designed for postures he didn't have. He didn't touch much. Instead, he walked with his eyes, scanning every surface like it might answer a question he hadn't dared ask. Evelyn was ahead of him, showing him around not with the warmth of a host, but the precision of someone handing over blueprints. Guest bathroom. Laundry chute. "That cabinet's locked," she said briskly without pausing, but then she did. One hallway ended in a white-painted door with a name faintly visible on the glass. Elise. Evelyn's fingers hesitated at the handle before she opened it, stepping aside. She didn't say anything. Just opened. Aiden didn't move. He didn't cross the threshold. Inside, the room looked untouched, not preserved, but paused. On the dresser, a snow globe sat next to a music box. Aiden stared, then looked at Evelyn. She didn't meet his eyes. For the first time since he arrived, she looked smaller than the walls around her. He stepped back. She closed the door. That night, Evelyn found a note by the fruit bowl in the kitchen. Folded once, written in sharp block letters. "Can I cook on Sunday?" No signature, but none needed. She left it on the counter, unread for hours, but her eyes kept returning to it while she worked. She didn't answer. Not out loud. But when Sunday came, the kitchen was clear. The groceries had been delivered, and she was out for errands exactly long enough for Aiden to claim the space. He wasn't a chef. He didn't pretend to be. But he had grown up next to Samuel, who never used recipes, only instincts, memories, and sharp commentary. Aiden peeled potatoes with the focus of someone defusing a bomb. He chopped onions with tears he blamed entirely on the onions. When Evelyn returned mid-preparation, she didn't walk in on a disaster. She walked in on something else entirely. A boy who wasn't performing, just participating. The smell wasn't extraordinary. It was familiar. Like every kitchen in Newark trying its best on a Sunday. He didn't speak when she entered. He just glanced up, nodded, and went back to stirring. She didn't offer help. She poured herself a glass of water and stayed. They ate at the wide table near the window. No phones. No background music. Just cutlery and conversation in the form of glances. Evelyn tried the stew first, slightly oversalted, but she didn't comment. Aiden served himself last, watching how she moved, how she held the spoon like she was remembering how to eat without distractions. After a few minutes of silence, he asked, "Did Elise cook?" Evelyn blinked, then set down her spoon. "No," she replied after a pause. She thought the kitchen was a place where things exploded or caught fire. Aiden let out half a smile, the first real one she'd seen. Smart girl. That made Evelyn laugh short, surprised and fleeting. The kind of laugh that breaks through defense. Aiden didn't push the conversation. He let the quiet settle again. They finished their plates, and she cleared hers without ceremony. No approval was spoken, but she left the pot on the stove. That was its own kind of answer. Just as Evelyn began to rinse her plate, the iPad on the counter lit up. Samuel's face appeared on the screen, already talking before the call fully connected. Is it too late to yell at you for not calling yesterday? He barked. Aiden hurried over and answered, leaning close. Was prepping. Sunday dinner. Samuel squinted, then smiled. Show me the plate. Aiden lifted the bowl toward the screen. Not bad, Samuel muttered. Color's off, though. Evelyn hovered for a moment, unsure whether to leave or stay. But Samuel caught sight of her. You must be the one with the giant apartment and the personality of a tax form, he said without missing a beat. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. And you must be the man who taught this boy how to weaponize sarcasm. Samuel laughed. Damn right, Aiden groaned. Can you both not? But something in his voice was lighter, less braced, less alone. The three of them talked, awkward at first, then like strangers on a delayed train finding rhythm. By the end of the call, Evelyn had asked Samuel about his chess wins, and he had called her Ice Queen with a good jawline. She didn't correct him. As the dishes soaked and the screen dimmed again, Evelyn sat back down at the table. She hadn't planned to. It just happened. Her wrist felt tight, the watch she always wore pressing harder than usual. For a moment she reached up to adjust it, then paused. And then without thought, without explanation, she undid the strap and set it on the table. She didn't even realize she'd done it until Aiden glanced at her wrist, then looked at her face, confused but saying nothing. She touched the spot absently, surprised by how naked her skin felt. 3 years. She hadn't taken that watch off in 3 years. Not for meetings, not for flights, not even to sleep. Aiden didn't press. He just looked down at his hands, then said, "Thanks for letting me cook." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Then, "Thanks for doing it." No one said anything else. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just ... shared. In a place where everything seemed to have a purpose and a pre-written role, that Sunday meal was unplanned. It wasn't an act of healing, it wasn't redemption, it wasn't even tradition yet, it was just a gesture. And gestures, if made sincerely, sometimes become turning points. Evelyn didn't overthink it, Aiden didn't dramatize it. But later that night, when she checked the kitchen before going to bed, she noticed something. The watch was still on the table. She reached for it and paused, then left it there. Just like that. Time, for the first time in years, had stepped out of its casing. It wasn't something she measured. It was something she shared. The folding chairs were arranged in neat, sterile rows, far too symmetrical for a real community event. Aiden stood near the back, arms crossed, watching the final rehearsals unfold like a PR campaign disguised as altruism. The signs were glossy, the smiles were tight, and the representatives from Evelyn's foundation were already arguing over where the banner should hang for optimal visibility. "Just there, make sure the logo isn't blocked," someone muttered. Nearby, a volunteer handed Aiden a printed note card with bullet points. "Thank the donors. Mention your story. Keep it under 2 minutes." He stared at the card, then at the man who gave it to him. "No," Aiden said plainly, handing it back. "Excuse me?" the man replied, confused. Aiden didn't repeat himself. Instead, he walked away, disappearing behind the modest stage's curtain. Evelyn, seated in the front row, caught his expression just before he vanished. She knew that look. She'd seen it on Elise the first time her daughter refused to wear the white dress for the photo shoot. The event coordinator approached Evelyn with concern, whispering about a potential delay, but she raised one hand. "Let him speak," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Her jaw did. When Aiden returned to the stage minutes later, he had nothing in his hands. No notes, no script. The MC introduced him with exaggerated warmth, calling him a shining symbol of tomorrow's promise. Aiden walked to the mic without smiling. "I'm not a symbol," he said flatly. The audience chuckled, some awkwardly, some nervously. He let the silence settle. "You brought cameras. You brought hashtags. But let's be honest, charity that poses doesn't feed anybody." Murmurs began, some defensive, others intrigued. You don't know what it's like to be invisible until you watch someone build something in your neighborhood and still not see you. You make decisions about us from boardrooms, then send interns to hand out pamphlets like they're keys to the city. Someone coughed. Someone else started to leave. But others leaned forward. Aiden took a breath. "So here's what we're going to do. If we're going to name something after Elise, we're not going to use it as a brand. We're going to make it count." He gestured toward the back of the room where a group of teens from Ironbound had gathered. "We're designing our own libraries, our own gardens, our own scholarship paths. Not for us, with us." By the time he finished, no one clapped immediately. The silence felt like held breath. Then from the far back, an older woman in a faded volunteer shirt stood up and clapped once, sharp and slow. Others followed, not out of politeness but out of something deeper. Agreement. Recognition. Resistance finally given a voice. Evelyn remained seated, hands clasped on her lap, unreadable. Not proud, not moved, just aware. Her phone buzzed beside her. Already someone had posted the video clip. 17 seconds of Aiden's speech were making their way across social media with hashtags she hadn't approved. Hashtag real talk, hashtag Elise means more, hashtag with us. She picked up the phone but didn't answer the call. Outside the community center, reporters had begun to gather, unsure whether this was a success story or the beginning of a scandal. Inside, the people Aiden spoke for surrounded him, not for autographs but for questions, offers, solidarity. One of the younger kids asked if he'd help them build a greenhouse. He nodded without hesitation. "Let's start next week," he said, already making mental notes of what tools they'd need. By that evening, the backlash had bloomed. Online opinions split down ideological lines. Some praised Aiden's raw honesty as a needed wake-up call. Others called him ungrateful, manipulated, or worse, a puppet of reverse elitism. Evelyn read every headline, every tweet, every op-ed. Some compared Aiden to Elise, framing him as her legacy. Others accused Evelyn of turning grief into a PR campaign gone rogue. She didn't respond, not publicly. She didn't even call her press advisor. What she did instead was replay the footage of the event in her home office 3 times. Not for the sound bites, for his posture, his pauses, the moments he chose not to speak. Aiden had taken control of the narrative not by defying her, but by embodying something she hadn't dared to: authenticity. She looked at the boy on the screen, not polished, not diplomatic, but deeply, unshakably present, and realized it wasn't Elise he reminded her of. It was Samuel, that raw backbone, that refusal to make discomfort easier for the powerful. She exhaled slowly and closed the laptop. Later that night, Aiden returned to the duplex covered in paint, dirt, and charcoal from helping sketch a blueprint for the garden initiative. He didn't knock before walking in. He never did. Evelyn was already seated in the kitchen, a cup of black tea going cold beside her. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. She looked at him and finally said, "You're not afraid to burn bridges." Aiden shrugged. "Only the ones not meant to carry weight." There was no follow-up, no lecture. Instead, Evelyn slid a small notebook across the counter toward him. "I'd like your input," she said. Aiden raised an eyebrow but took it. The pages were blank except for one. The top read, "Initiativa, Elise, Phase 1. Beneath it, bullet points with question marks. He flipped the page again. Nothing. "You actually want help?" he asked, "or do you just want to say you asked?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "If we're going to do it," she said, "it has to be with them, not for them." Aiden looked at her longer than usual. Then, without a word, he pulled a pen from his hoodie and began to write. And from the 42nd floor, where deals were usually born behind mirrored conference walls and digitized projections, Evelyn Hart wrote something real for the first time in years. In the notebook she had kept empty since Elise died, she made one entry. Just one. No punctuation, no explanations. Just a sentence that would later define everything that followed. If we're going to do it, it has to be with them, not for them. It began with a leak, 3 paragraphs in a mid-tier financial blog that no one took seriously until the bigger outlets pounced. Within hours, Evelyn Hart was trending for the wrong reasons. The boy she took in was never just a cause, one article read. He's the heir apparent. The headlines weren't just loud, they were surgical. Phrases like strategic guardianship, image laundering, and conflicted legacy made Evelyn look like a puppeteer and Aiden like an opportunist. Hart and Rowe's legal team scrambled. The PR department prepared a statement before Evelyn had even seen the leak. When she finally did, she didn't say a word. Just closed her laptop, pressed her palm to her forehead, and whispered, "Damn it. Elise." Aiden, meanwhile, found out through a friend's text, "Yo, you rich now?" Front page stuff. At first he thought it was a prank. Then he walked past the TV in the school lounge and saw his own face framed in red. Bold letters. Teen prodigy inherits millions from philanthropist mentor. By lunchtime, 3 kids asked him for interviews. Another called him a sellout. And someone he didn't know who spat near his locker. It wasn't the money that hit hardest. It was the smell of doubt. Hart and Rowe, the polished empire of Evelyn's making, wasn't immune to the scandal. Though no official statements were made, the change in behavior said enough. Employees avoided eye contact when Aiden entered. Conversations fell quiet when he passed glass-walled conference rooms. It was subtle at first, a delay in returning his ID badge, a scheduling error at the front desk. Then it became undeniable. He overheard one junior partner call him the walking PR liability. Another whispered, "He's either a pawn or the next CEO, depending on how the wind blows." Evelyn kept him close that week, too close. Meetings, lunches, scheduled photo ops with committees he didn't care about. It was all control dressed as care. And when Aiden finally asked, "Did you name me in the will before or after you brought me here?" Evelyn didn't answer. She simply poured more coffee and said, "You're not a headline to me. But it didn't matter. The trust was bruised. No matter how much she tried to maintain their shared routine, something between them had cracked, not loudly but irreparably. Back at school, the fallout continued. Brooklyn High School of the Arts had always been Aiden's refuge, but now the mirrors in the dance studio felt accusatory. Every spin that once came from instinct now faltered under self-consciousness. Whispers bled through the locker room walls. He bought his way in. Bet Evelyn pays his tuition in gold bars. Even teachers treated him differently. Some became overly kind. Others distanced themselves, unsure where their support might fall on the political spectrum of heart versus integrity. But the worst wound came from within. Aiden began questioning his own trajectory. Were the scholarships real? Was the opportunity to choreograph next month's showcase earned or gifted? One afternoon during rehearsal, he missed a turn, stumbled, and caught himself too late. The room fell silent. "You okay?" someone asked. He nodded, but the lie felt heavier than the fall. That night he stayed behind alone, replaying the choreography over and over. It didn't fix anything. Movement had always been his clarity. Now, it was noise. At home, things took another turn. Evelyn hired a tutor, ostensibly to help Aiden stay ahead with school given the chaos. The woman, Miss Denning, was too polished, too polite. Her sweetness had edges. She'd smile as she corrected him and say things like, "You don't want to disappoint Evelyn, do you? Or some of us don't get second chances like you did." Aiden caught on quickly. She wasn't there to teach. She was there to shape. One afternoon, he snapped mid-session. "You're not here for me," he said, voice tight. Ms. Denning tilted her head. "No, Aiden. I'm here because Evelyn doesn't want to lose you." That struck deeper than she knew. Not because it was cruel, but because it felt calculated. That evening, Aiden didn't speak to Evelyn. He ate dinner in silence, left the dishes unwashed, and stared at the city lights without really seeing them. He wasn't angry, he was exhausted of being a story, a statement, a strategy. When the tension reached its tipping point, there was no confrontation, no shouting match, just a yellow post-it stuck quietly to the kitchen counter, written in his unmistakable block letters. "Don't turn me into a debt." That was all. 6 words. No name, no signature. But Evelyn knew. She stood frozen in front of it for a full minute before touching the paper, her fingertips tracing the edge like it might burn. The last time she'd seen Aiden write something that raw, it had been on the back of a crumpled receipt, his conditions for coming into her life. And now this note wasn't a protest, it was a boundary, a whispered plea. She didn't respond. She didn't chase him into his room or ask for clarification. Instead, she walked to her desk drawer, opened the small velvet box where she kept Elisa's ribbon, the one with her name written in shaky blue ink, and placed the post-it beside it. She closed the lid slowly, like sealing a pact she wasn't sure how to keep. The call came in before sunrise. By the time Aiden arrived at the community garden, most of the damage had already been cordoned off. Shards of glass glittered like salt across the damp soil, and the frame of the greenhouse sagged under the weight of its own collapse. The volunteers stood in stunned silence, unsure whether to cry or curse. Some did both. The greenhouse hadn't just been a structure, it had been proof. Proof that they could create something together on their own terms. And now it looked like a crime scene. Aiden didn't speak. He didn't ask who did it. He just dropped to his knees in the mud and began collecting the scattered seedlings with bare, trembling hands. His fingers moved slowly, carefully, trying to save what hadn't been crushed. Every root he held felt like a name, a promise not yet fulfilled. They went for the tomatoes first, someone muttered behind him, like it mattered. Ethan appeared minutes later holding garbage bags and duct tape, already pulling on gloves. "Don't talk. Just tell me where to start," he said. Aiden didn't lift his head. He pointed to the back row. They worked in silence. That, too, was a kind of language. The report from security came faster than expected. It wasn't just vandalism, it was targeted. Surveillance footage showed 2 masked figures, but one wore a jacket embroidered with the initials of a private prep school one. Charles Davenport III had attended before transferring. Within hours, names were whispered, not confirmed but understood. The circles were too small, the connections too neat. The press hadn't caught on yet, but it was only a matter of time. Ethan read the incident report aloud beside the compost bins. They waited until the sensors reset for the night. Smart timing. This wasn't some bored kids thing. Aiden didn't respond. He was focused on tying a broken tomato stem to a makeshift splint fashioned out of a popsicle stick. "You think Davenport sent them?" Ethan asked finally. Aiden looked up, eyes hard. "I think Davenport doesn't have to lift a finger to make this kind of thing happen," Ethan nodded. Then we make it cost him something. They didn't discuss revenge, not directly, but there was an understanding. This wouldn't be swept under a rug. Not like all the other things rich boys broke and walked away from. Samuel showed up without being called. His arrival was a statement in itself. He brought with him an armful of wooden stakes pulled from old fencing behind his building and a plastic bag filled with nails, wire, and 2 overripe apples that he handed to Aiden without ceremony. "Eat," he ordered. "You're no good to anyone, Dizzy." Aiden took one and bit into it without arguing. Samuel looked over the damage and nodded once. Nothing here can't grow again. Might even come back stronger. He started driving stakes into the ground while Ethan stretched heavy plastic sheeting across the collapsed frame. It wasn't about rebuilding yet, it was about refusing to disappear. Every volunteer found something to do, even if it was just sweeping shards into buckets or writing down which plants might be salvageable. The garden didn't mourn. It moved. That was how it survived. And as Aiden moved among them, his hands caked in wet soil and splinters. Something in him settled, not peacefully but with clarity. This wasn't a project anymore. It was a fight. The sound of tires screeching over gravel came too fast for anyone to react. Evelyn's car hadn't even fully stopped when the door flew open and she jumped out, heels sinking into soft earth. She didn't speak, didn't scan the scene with corporate detachment or demand an explanation. She walked straight to Aiden, saw the streak of dried blood on his palm, and pulled a handkerchief from her coat pocket. He didn't flinch when she took his hand. She pressed the cloth gently, cleaned the shallow cut, and wrapped the fabric tight, knotting it like muscle memory. There was no lecture. No public display, just motion. Repair. Her breath was uneven, like she'd been holding it since the moment she saw the news alert. Aiden stared at her, face tight, pale, but present. "I told you this would happen," he said, voice low. "And I didn't listen," she replied, eyes locked on his. "But I'm here now, not to fix it, to help you hold it up." The moment didn't need to be longer than it was. It simply needed to be real. Around them, the garden kept moving, refusing to stall just because someone wanted it to. Ethan approached with a clipboard in one hand and a snapped rake handle in the other. "Inventory of the damage is halfway done," he said, handing the list to Aiden. "Most of the irrigation system is gone. We'll need donors or duct tape. Or both." Aiden took the clipboard, his other hand still wrapped in Evelyn's handkerchief. "We'll rebuild it, publicly, loudly." Ethan smiled. "That'll piss them off more than a lawsuit." Aiden didn't smile back. He was too focused now, too clear. "We're not here to piss anyone off. We're here to make it impossible for them to pretend we're not." Samuel passed behind them, carrying a load of bricks for foundation work, whistling off-key. The community moved like a single organism, bruised but intact. Evelyn didn't try to lead. She just followed Aiden's pace. It was the first time she wasn't a step ahead or behind him, just beside. That shift, subtle and wordless, did more than any apology could. As the day waned and volunteers began to pack up, Aiden stayed kneeling in the soil, replanting what he could, finger by finger. His hands were filthy but steady. Evelyn watched from a few feet away, her heels ruined, knees slightly bent as if resisting the urge to kneel too. He didn't look up when she stepped closer, but when she crouched beside him and held out a seedling, he accepted it. Not with words, with hands. That was enough. That was everything. And in that moment, brief, unnoticed by cameras, irrelevant to press statements, repairs stopped being a headline and became the work of hands and roots, of fingers in the dirt, of people showing up not to save but to stay. They offered him checks. Polished people in polished rooms, all wanting to be part of something that made them feel less like the problem. Manhattan's elite lined up with smiles sharp enough to cut, proposing partnerships wrapped in publicity. "Let's put your story in motion," one executive said. "We'll match donations dollar for dollar, just let us use your face." Another offered exclusive branding for a line of eco-friendly gardening kits. Aiden listened, nodded politely, and declined them all. Not because he didn't need the money, he did, but because he had already chosen another path. One brick at a time, one name at a time, one receipt at a time. He turned to the bodegas that had given him change for lunch when he was still invisible. The church kitchens that fed his neighbors even when donations dried up. And the professors at Rutgers Newark who offered their Saturdays and their lesson plans for free. He built a network from the ground up, imperfect, unpaid, but real. The fundraising started with mason jars and QR codes taped to fridges, but the numbers grew. So did the faces. Retirees who couldn't lift shovels but could write letters. Teenagers who skipped parties to sort supplies. The roots grew deep before anyone noticed. Evelyn noticed. Not because of the press, by then most outlets had moved on to fresher scandals, but because her calendar began to crumble under its own contradictions. Every time she tried to reconcile the donor meetings with Aiden's community-driven structure, something snapped. One moment she was fielding a call from a museum board threatening to withdraw support. The next she was being accused by columnists of cloaking gentrification and grassroots branding. Her advisors kept asking for a cohesive strategy, but every time she tried to explain what was happening, she sounded like she was losing control, which in truth she was. Evelyn wasn't used to splitting lanes. She was used to directing traffic. But Aiden wasn't asking for permission. He was rerouting the road entirely. And still, Evelyn defended him behind closed doors. He's not naive, she told a longtime investor. He's principled. There's a difference. The investor smiled and replied, "And principles don't build endowments." Evelyn didn't answer. She just ended the call and crossed another name off her calendar. The house was quieter these days. Aiden barely came home before 10 p.m., and when he did, it was with dirt under his nails and calluses growing across his palms. He didn't report. He didn't justify. He simply moved through the space like someone who had earned every room but didn't want to own them. Evelyn watched him come and go. Sometimes she stayed up just to see him walk in. Other times she left meals covered in the fridge with no note. They weren't distant, just orbiting different centers of gravity. She didn't try to reclaim him. She respected his distance, but the strain was beginning to show, especially when donors brought up optics or when her foundation's executive board pressured her to rein in the boy. That phrase stuck in her chest like a sliver of glass. Rein him in. As if he were a horse. As if Elise hadn't raised her voice the first time someone said the same about her. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Instead, she walked the halls she never walked at night, toward the door she usually passed quickly. She stood before Elise's room longer than she expected. She didn't open the door. She didn't need to. Just standing there was enough to feel the weight of everything she hadn't resolved. Her daughter was gone. Aiden was not. But the world kept trying to make him into a product, a headline, a symbol, and Evelyn unintentionally had let it happen. That had to end. Right there, standing outside that door. She opened the leather-bound notebook she rarely used unless decisions had to be permanent. Her hand hovered for a moment, then began to write, not pages, not strategy decks. Just a list. Short, brutal, honest. Necessary dismissals, she wrote first. Then, board expansion with community seats. A pause. Then, radical transparency, non-negotiable. 3 lines. 3 declarations. When she closed the notebook, her hand shook slightly, but the decision didn't. She stood there a few minutes more, thinking not about optics, but about ownership. Not legal, but moral. If the foundation was going to survive this shift, it had to become something she no longer controlled alone. Something that could stand even if she stepped away. Maybe that was the only way it would last. The next morning she arrived at Hart & Row without her assistant, without makeup, without preamble. She entered the boardroom during the weekly leadership meeting and didn't wait for silence. Effective immediately, I'm releasing 3 senior advisors from contract, she said. They've done nothing wrong, but they can't lead what's coming. A hush fell over the table. We're expanding the board to include permanent seats held by members of the communities we serve. And we're publishing quarterly reports on all expenditures, projects, and partnerships. A hand rose. She ignored it. This isn't a vote, a second hand. You're breaking the bylaws, someone said. Good, she replied. The bylaws were written to protect the wrong people. Someone stood up and left. Another muttered something about litigation. Evelyn stayed still. She wasn't performing rebellion. She was making space, and that space would hurt, but it would also heal. The kind of healing that doesn't ask for applause. The kind that knows roots grow better when the soil's been turned over. Back at home, the leather notebook sat closed on her desk, but the echoes of its list rippled outward. Things were shifting. Irrevocably. She didn't ask Aiden if he noticed. She didn't need to. He came home that night and walked past her without words, but he stopped briefly outside Elisa's door. Just for a breath. Just enough for her to know. Evelyn sat down in her office chair and opened the drawer where she kept Elisa's ribbon and the yellow post-it Aiden once left. She didn't move them, just looked. The list she wrote outside that door no longer felt like damage control. It felt like commitment, and for the first time in years, her decisions didn't feel like they were chasing ghosts. They felt like they were planting something that might not bloom in her hands, but might bloom anyway. That was enough. The next morning, she would act again. It was well past midnight when Aiden let himself into the Hart & Row Tower using the badge Evelyn had never revoked. He didn't come with a plan. He came with a question he hadn't known how to ask out loud. The executive floor was empty, its silence broken only by the dull hum of forgotten printers and servers resting between deadlines. The storage room was unlocked. That surprised him. What didn't surprise him were the boxes stacked, coded, dated. Some were labeled with phrases like urban development, phase 3, or community revitalization, 2016 to 2021, words that sounded harmless until opened. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he started finding it. Eviction notices, lease transfers, land use amendments signed by Hart and Rowe attorneys, dozens, hundreds, addresses he knew, buildings he'd walked past his whole life, the bodega that closed after rent tripled overnight, the community center that moved 2 blocks away without explanation. Aiden sat on the floor, knees pulled in, surrounded by open files like they were evidence from a crime scene he had somehow survived without knowing. These weren't numbers. They were names, families, neighbors. He didn't cry. He just waited for her. She found him an hour later. Evelyn had been working late when her assistant texted that the office motion detectors had gone off. She could have sent security. She didn't. Instead, she walked into the storage room and stopped cold. Aiden was sitting on the floor holding an envelope she recognized, Charles Street Properties, 2018. She opened her mouth, then closed it. He didn't look up. He simply pointed to the box nearest his left foot. These addresses, he said, voice low but sharp, they're all within 5 miles of Ironbound. Evelyn swallowed hard. Yes, he turned another page. This one's my street. Finally, he looked at her. You didn't know? Her silence was answer enough. I didn't handle those cases directly, she began. It was part of a broader initiative tied to city rezoning. We had no control over final execution. Aiden laughed once, bitter, but your name's on it. Her hand shook slightly. She clasped them behind her back. We thought we were helping. Cleaning up abandoned spaces, incentivizing investment. He tossed a folder toward her feet. You were displacing people, quietly, legally, but fully. She knelt beside him, ignoring the paper cuts the folder edges gave her. We thought we could protect some spaces if we played along, get ahead of it before the real predators moved in. Her voice cracked. Not from tears, she wasn't crying, but from something older than regret. It was never meant to be permanent. It was compromise, not conquest. Aiden stared at her, tired in a way no sleep would fix. But you took the deal, he said. You cashed the checks. And when people lost their homes, you filed it under collateral. She didn't deny it. Couldn't. Instead, she looked at one of the map-colored zones marking demolition schedules and redevelopment contracts. We used to say we were modernizing the city, she whispered. Now it feels like we were erasing it. Aiden leaned back against the wall. You were erasing us. Her flinch was involuntary. He noticed. And now you want me to believe the initiative at least means something? Evelyn didn't respond. For the first time in weeks, she didn't try to defend her intention. She simply sat in the wreckage of her own paper empire, surrounded by proofs of harm she could no longer redact. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. It wasn't the awkward kind, it was the kind that strips you bare. The kind where there's nothing left to hide behind because the truth has taken all the air. Aiden didn't try to fill it. He let her sit in it. Let her feel the weight of what she'd built and what it had cost. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Phooey EU. No attempt at mitigation, no justifications. Just that. I did this. It echoed more than any full confession ever could. Aiden closed the folder in his lap. Slowly, carefully, like it was something breakable. Then he slid it across the floor until it stopped in front of her. Then be the one to undo it, he said. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't hopeful either. It was tired, firm, honest. Don't pass it to me. Don't outsource redemption. You started it, you finish it. Evelyn didn't nod, didn't promise. She just stared at the folder, one hand resting on top of it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his jeans. He didn't wait for her to rise. Didn't need to. This wasn't about punishment anymore, it was about ownership. The kind that starts with admitting the damage before imagining repair. As he stepped out of the room, he paused briefly in the doorway. You said once that I wasn't a debt, he said without turning. Don't turn Newark into one either. And then he left. Evelyn remained where she was, surrounded by boxes that once represented strategy and progress, now reduced to a graveyard of rationalizations. She didn't cry. Instead, she opened the folder again and stared at the signature line, her name. written in permanent ink under a contract that had unmade a neighborhood. She reached into her bag, pulled out a pen, and turned the page over. She began writing a new sentence. It wouldn't undo anything, but it would begin something, and for now, that would have to be enough. Back home, Aiden said nothing to Samuel about the night, just washed his hands longer than necessary and sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook. He began writing numbers, budgets, timelines, lists of volunteers to check in with for the next round of rebuilding. He didn't mention Evelyn, so he didn't need to. Samuel glanced at him once and, seeing the way Aiden's shoulders had lowered slightly, gave a slow nod and went back to his crossword. Somewhere across town, in the tower that bore her name, Evelyn sat alone in a room filled with legal paper and silence. And in front of her, one folder lay open. Inside, Aiden's street, her signature, her next move. She pulled the folder toward her and whispered again, not for forgiveness but for resolve. "Entuo seja eu quem desfaz," and she began. The auditorium of the Newark Museum of Art wasn't just full, it pulsed, not from applause or music, but from expectation. Every seat held someone with something at stake: displaced families, city planners, high schoolers in hoodies, artists with ink-stained hands, community organizers with folded pamphlets, and corporate donors wondering if they'd made the wrong bet. On stage, Aiden stood alone before the screen, not hiding behind branding or euphemisms. Projected behind him was a brutal timeline: dates, addresses, and contract numbers tracing the arc of displacement in Newark over the last decade. It wasn't abstract, it was precise and devastating. "These aren't just dots on a map," he said. "They're front doors that don't exist anymore. They're grocery stores turned condos. Their lives rerouted without notice." The room was silent, not from discomfort, but because everyone was choosing to listen. Then Aiden switched slides. A new proposal, one that demanded not compensation but transformation. "We want living libraries. We want access to art, housing, green space. We want community-led budgets and chairs at the table, not as decoration but as decision makers." He stepped back. "We're not asking for permission. We're offering a deal." The final slide read, "Governance belongs to those who live the consequence." From the edge of the stage, Charles Davenport cleared his throat and approached the podium like he was entitled to it. In his hand, a folder thick with counter-arguments, legal language, charts suggesting instability, projections of risk. He opened the folder theatrically as if about to perform surgery. "What my colleague failed to mention," Davenport began, "is that good intentions don't build sustainable models. Sentiment doesn't balance budgets." He flipped to the first chart, a diagonal red line. "These proposals may sound idealistic, but they're structurally dangerous. They ignore capital flow. They disregard legal precedent. They set expectations we cannot meet without economic collapse." But his voice didn't land. Not because the numbers weren't sharp, but because the people in the room didn't need to be told what was practical. They were living what had already been called practical, and it had failed them. As Davenport turned a page, someone near the back muttered, "That's my block." Another said, "That's my cousin's building." The data in his folder had names now, and the room knew each one. Eyes stopped following his hands and started scanning the crowd, because here the crowd was the argument. A few seats from the front, Samuel stood. He didn't wait for the microphone to reach him. He walked up, took it from the side table without asking, and turned toward the audience, not the stage. "You all know me," he said simply, "or at least someone like me." There were nods. A beat of shared understanding. "I'm not here to debate ROI, I'm here to remind you what a garden is. It ain't charity. It's a damn contract." He looked directly at Davenport. "You don't plant nothing unless you plan to come back to care for it. Water it, pull weeds, share the harvest." His voice was steady, but his presence carried decades. "You tore things down and called it progress. Well, now the people you stepped over are planting roots." The room broke into scattered applause. Not orchestrated, not polite, just real. Davenport stepped back from the mic without finishing his dossier. No one asked him to continue. Aiden watched quietly from behind the curtain, his eyes never leaving Samuel. That was the speech the city needed. Not from a teen with charts, but from a man who had lived through every wave of policy and still showed up with seeds. When Evelyn walked onto the stage, there was no fanfare, no press release in hand, no security detail. She didn't even wait for the moderator to introduce her. She simply climbed the steps, heels steady, hair pulled back, eyes unreadable, and faced the audience. "You already know who I am," she said. "And if you don't, that's my fault." A pause. Then, "I don't come with a defense. I come with decisions." She reached into her coat and pulled out a single document, no branding, just a signature page and 3 columns of action. She read them aloud. Effective immediately. 3 executive dismissals at Hart and Row. 2 board seats reserved for local leadership voting. Not symbolic. And full public audits of every partnership we hold going forward. She held up the pen. We've talked enough. Now we sign. She walked to the edge of the table, set up center stage, and placed the document down. Aiden was already walking to meet her. One by one, others followed: community leaders, organizers, educators. The crowd didn't cheer. It breathed. Because something was shifting. Not promised, but starting. As the final signature hit the page, Evelyn lifted her gaze and found Aiden standing across from her. For a second, they simply stared. No one spoke. There was no hug, no grand embrace. But something far more complicated passed between them. Recognition, exhaustion, accountability. The kind of understanding forged through conflict and consequence, not sentiment. She didn't try to justify anymore. He didn't try to forgive yet. But they stood at the same table. That was enough. Evelyn placed the signed agreement in a clear folder and passed it to the moderator. Aiden stepped down from the stage first. She followed a step behind. They didn't touch. But as they walked side by side, there was alignment. And that, for now, felt heavier than affection. It felt like truth. In a city used to watching promises evaporate under the heat of bureaucracy, something unusual had just happened. People had been heard, and then answered. The agreement wasn't perfect. No one in the room believed it would fix everything. But for the first time in years, action hadn't come from behind glass, but from those with dirt still under their fingernails. As the stage emptied and people began to leave, Samuel remained in his seat, arms crossed, watching the signatures dry. Now, he said softly to himself, we see who comes back tomorrow with a shovel. He stood, adjusted his coat, and followed the others. Back on stage, Evelyn placed the pen down and looked again at Aiden. No hug, no smile, just that shared look. It wasn't closure, it was commitment. A deal made not in press releases, but in the presence of everyone it had once ignored. Truth not clean, but real stood signed between them. The annual spring planting day felt different this year. It wasn't about ceremony anymore, it was about permanence. Children raced between raised beds, their laughter cutting through the morning air as they dragged watering cans and packets of seeds. Volunteers moved with purpose, not performance. These weren't guests, they were stewards. Ethan stood near a smudged whiteboard marked with soil-stained fingers, assigning stations like a director setting cues. Mulch crew over there, compost sorting to the left. Tools get cleaned before we finish, not after. His voice carried just enough command to be obeyed, but left room for people to joke back. Aiden moved between tasks like a conductor without a baton, answering questions, calming toddlers, adjusting stakes. None of it was rehearsed. All of it mattered. By the compost bins, Samuel was crouched, tying blue ribbons around the finished beds, one for every plot planted by a first-timer. The scissors he used were older than the school building behind them, and every snip sounded like punctuation. You plant, you mark, he muttered, handing out ribbons with gruff pride. Each cut, each tie was its own quiet act of recognition. Evelyn arrived late, but not by accident. She had waited not out of hesitation, but out of understanding. This wasn't her stage anymore. It was theirs. She stepped out of the car in jeans and boots, holding something small and wrapped in damp cloth. A red maple sapling, roots fragile but stubborn. It was the same tree Aiden had insisted on nursing through the harshest weeks of winter, refusing to give up on it even after the nursery said it was probably done for. She didn't look for him immediately. Instead, she walked toward the eastern corner of the garden where the last open plot remained unclaimed. Aiden saw her, paused, but didn't wave. He just walked over and stood beside her. No one gave them space, they made it themselves, quietly. She knelt first, holding the sapling upright. He crouched, scooping soil with bare hands. No instructions, no assigned roles. One held, the other covered. It was slow work, deliberate. Roots needed to be seeded with care. They worked without speaking, and still, everything was said. When the tree was standing on its own, the soil tamped and firm, Evelyn reached into her jacket pocket. Her hands weren't shaking, but they moved cautiously, as if the paper inside might disintegrate. She pulled out the yellow post-it note, creased, a little faded, but intact. The same one Aiden had once left on her kitchen counter in a different kind of silence. Don't turn me into a debt. She unfolded it slowly, looked at it for a long beat, then held it out to him like a peace offering. I kept this, she said. Not because I needed to be reminded, but because I wasn't ready to answer it. Aiden looked at the note, then at her. She met his gaze. I can't undo what I've done, but I'd like to offer something. I've never promised to anyone since Elise. She hesitated just long enough for the wind to catch part of the note. A place, a name, time. If you want it. There was no tremor in her voice, only weight. It wasn't a request. It was an offering, open but not owed. Aiden didn't take the post-it. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached into the gardening crate beside him and pulled out one of the small white plant labels they'd used all morning. He took a permanent marker from his back pocket, still stained with soil, and wrote, slowly, clearly, Morale's heart. Then, without flourish, he pressed the label into the ground near the sapling's base, not where it would draw attention, just where it would last. Evelyn exhaled, not relief, not triumph, something else. Acceptance, maybe. Aiden didn't explain his choice. He didn't have to. The hyphen said enough. It didn't erase what came before. It didn't demand allegiance. It joined. Samuel, watching from a few feet away, gave a slight nod. Not approval. Recognition. That's what a name meant when chosen, not given. It became a thing you grew into, not something used to frame you. No one clapped. No photos were taken. The moment passed quietly, absorbed by the movement of the garden. Ethan returned to his workshop board, adding a new session titled How to Protect a Sapling. Children kept running, digging, shouting across rows of seedlings. Samuel moved to the edge of the fence to talk to a newcomer about setting up a compost bin. Life didn't pause. It continued. And yet something shifted in the ground, like a seam had been stitched instead of stretched. Evelyn remained crouched beside the tree a little longer, her hand hovering just above the soil. Then she stood. Aiden joined the others, grabbing gloves and a hose. They didn't walk away from each other. They walked forward, separately but no longer apart. That was the difference. Spring doesn't begin with the calendar. It doesn't bloom on command. It starts in places like this, a raised bed on the edge of a reclaimed lot, where a red maple stands newly planted and a handmade label claims its place. Morale's heart. A name born not of blood, but of decision. Not of inheritance, but of intention. And with that root in the earth and that label in the soil, something old loosened, something new held. The season had arrived, not in weather, but in will. And this time it carried names. Here at Stories That Touch, we make each video with real care, listening to your messages, shaping every scene, and thinking about you as if we were sitting at the same table. If this story moved you, we'd be honored to have you with us. Subscribe so we can keep bringing heartfelt, meaningful stories to your screen. Your subscription truly helps us continue the work. We also invite you to explore our other videos and share your thoughts below. Tell us what spoke to you, what you'd like to see next, or a memory this story brought back. We read every comment, especially from our wonderful viewers 65+, and your voice guides what we create. Thank you for being part of this community. Your presence here matters.